We're really pleased and really honored to have with us one of Lubin's very, very successful alumna, Cheryl Idell. Cheryl earned a BBA from Pace on the New York City campus. As of January 2020, she's been serving as the Executive Vice President and Chief Research Officer for WarnerMedia Entertainment and Direct to Consumer. In this role, she is responsible for overseeing the functional areas of research across WarnerMedia Entertainment, centralizing expertise in viewership, content and strategic market research, insights and analytics, as well as leading the product research efforts. Prior to joining WarnerMedia, she served as a measurement consultant for Quibi and head of entertainment measurement and head of US vertical measurement at Snap Inc., a product I know a lot of you use. Other companies she has worked for include Mindshare West Coast, IAG Research, Nielsen, 20th Century Fox, and Initiative Media. Cheryl is in the midst of a fantastic career, and we cannot be prouder of her accomplishments. With that, I would like to introduce Ms. Cheryl Idell. Cheryl.
Awesome, thanks. Thanks for having me. This is fun to do. I always love checking out everybody's backgrounds on Zoom. It's such a more interesting way to get to know a little bit about people. But no, I appreciate being invited to do this. I'll start out and give you guys a little bit of my about my history, my background at Pace, a little bit about my career path, although I don't really call it a path because it sort of meandered a bit, and then talk to a little bit about the role that I'm in now. But feel free to ask questions as I'm going along. I don't mind being interrupted. And then there'll definitely be lots of time after for Q&A. So I'll start out a little bit, I am originally a New Yorker. So I am sitting right now in Palm Springs, California. And if I was in a different room, you'd see this beautiful mountain behind me. Not at all what I ever envisioned when I grew up in Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn. So I grew up in an apartment in Brooklyn. And my dad was a grocer, very New York, middle class background, and then never really could have envisioned sort of the life that I grew into and what I'm living now. But so living in Brooklyn back in the day, in the 80s, when I was graduating high school, I actually graduated when I was only 16. So growing up in New York, they had something called SP, which was special progress. And you could choose to either skip a grade or go into a more academically aggressive program. And so even back then, I always wanted to do everything really fast. So I chose to skip a grade. So I skipped 7th grade. So I graduated high school when I was 16. And in fact, I chose to graduate 6 months early in January of the year that I was 16. So I went away to college at 16 years old, and I went to Oneonta State University, College at Oneonta, or SUCCO, as they called it, which was known for having more bars per square mile than any place else, like in the country. I think that was the reason that I chose it back then. But after 2 years full time in college, I decided to come home and move back with my family. And I started working full time in advertising. And so I got a job working at an ad agency in their billing department. And I started to go to Pace as a part-time student. So my entry into Pace really was because Pace catered to people who were working, and there were programs that I could take as a business student and as at the time, communications major, and work at the same time. So I was taking classes at the downtown campus in the city, as well as we were just talking a little bit before this started, there was a midtown campus, which basically was a rented floor in an office building somewhere around like 6th Avenue in the 40s. And my office that I was working at was right near there. So that allowed me to take classes literally either before work. So I would take classes at 7:15 in the morning or at lunchtime because I could make it from my office to a class, or after work. So my experience at Pace was while I was working full time in the advertising industry, and taking classes pretty much around the clock. So I would sometimes get up in the morning, I'd go to the downtown campus, I would take a class, I'd hop on the subway, get up to my office, work a full day, take a midtown class at 6 p.m., then get home all the way back to Brooklyn. And so I definitely did not have a very traditional college experience, because I was just bouncing up and back between working and classes. But it was interesting because I was already, in a lot of ways, doing the job that I wanted to do, but I knew how important it was for me to finish school. And in fact, I had was working at an ad agency as an intern at the time, and they offered me a full-time job. And my boss said, I will only give you this full-time job if you guarantee that you graduate. If you drop out, if you, stop taking your classes, you will no longer work here. So it was really important to him that I continued my education. He didn't want that to be a reason that I stopped at school. And so that was what I did. And that really was my PACE experience. I started as an intern in an ad agency called Ted Bates after that first job in production or production billing. And the internship that I got into, I got into it because my friend's sister was a media planner at Ted Bates Advertising. I kind of thought I wanted to be in advertising. I sat down with the guy who was running the internship program, and he said, well, there are three things in media in an ad agency that you can do. There's media planning, there's media buying, or there's media research. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, how do I know? That's why I'm going to be an intern. I don't really know what these things are. And the guy that was interviewing me happened to run research at the agency. And he said, okay, well, basically I like you. I'm going to put you in research. And that truly is how my career in research in advertising and entertainment started. So it was, I was working, landed in that, and it just stuck for me. And what I really always loved about research, and I always joke that, I was in data before it was cool to be in data, and before it was a really valid career path. And now you can't be in any industry and not understand data. So a lot of it was luck that I ended up interviewing with the guy who ran research. And what I loved about research and data was the storytelling aspect of it. In fact, I never liked data and numbers just for the sake of it. I always would say, like, being an accountant wasn't ever anything that for me would have worked. But what I love is that that I can look at numbers and data and find the story and the meaning in it. And starting out in my career, the data was very much about, and pretty much always has been, it's a way of understanding consumers, right? It's understanding what people do, what people say they do, what people watch, what people buy, and using that information to inform important business decisions. So I started out my career in ad agencies, in media research, and our job was to use all kinds of data to help the people who were doing either media planning or media buying make decisions. And a lot of times I'll compare that to like the financial industry, right? Where a financial analyst studies the stocks, studies the marketplace and the trends so that they can advise the people who are actually making the investments, right? What's happening at the companies and where they should be investing somebody's money. So that's kind of the same thing in the advertising industry, where the researchers are doing that same kind of work. And they're studying consumers and media trends to advise the people who are making investments in advertising, right? So that was kind of where I started. And working at an ad agency or a media agency is a great foundation because you work for so many different kinds of clients. So you start to understand, the first years of my career, I worked on Panasonic, electronics. I worked on Procter & Gamble. I worked on General Foods. I worked on the U.S. Army. I worked on Disney. So I worked on Home Depot, on AOL, on like such a wide range of categories that it really gave me a really good background. And then after working at several different agencies in New York, I had gotten married. I got married when I did everything when I was very young. So I am married since I'm 21 years old. Not something I would generally recommend, but it's worked out very well for me. I am still married to the same man. And we have 2 grown children, but, and I was still at Pace when I got married. I was still a student at Pace when I got married. So we decided to pick up and move to LA. And we did that after coming here, literally to Palm Springs, for my uncle's 4th wedding. And it was February, and it was a blizzard in New York, and we were in his jacuzzi, and I was looking at the mountains. They looked kind of like Cheryls Background that I'm looking at right now. And my uncle said, like, why don't you kids move to LA? What are you doing in New York? Look at the weather. Look what you could have here. And we literally picked up with no jobs, no anything. And having really never even been to Los Angeles, we'd only ever been to Palm Springs. And we moved to LA. And I got a job at an ad agency that was focused on entertainment. And that's really how I shifted from traditional categories and advertising into entertainment focused advertising. And this was back in the day when the Cosby Show, God, I hate even saying that out loud, was the #1 show on television, and Paramount Movie Studios was the #1 studio. And I worked for an agency where those were our 2 biggest clients. And that's when the entertainment bug like really hit me. And I realized it was so much more interesting to me to launch a new movie or launch a new TV show. And every week, every show, every movie had a different audience and a different nuance to it than it was to work, let's say, on the Unilever account and focus on like Dove deodorant, which is fine, though, nothing to diminish that. And that's important, but it wasn't what made me tick. It was this passion for the entertainment industry. And that's sort of where that took off for me. So I then worked at an agency here in LA for close to a dozen years that had the Disney account. And that was really one of the primary things I focused on, was working on the Disney business. The first movie I ever worked on was Good Morning Vietnam, Robin Williams movie that came out. It was a Thanksgiving weekend. And I just kind of got thrown right into that and just fell in love with everything that had to do with entertainment. And it was so exciting for me, this kid from Brooklyn, to get to go onto the Disney lot. And literally you would drive up and you'd see like the sound stages, and I'd get to walk down like Mickey Drive and Dopey Lane. And it was just like, who knew that that really existed in the world? It was just something that I watched on television, you know? So I was definitely bitten by that bug. And after spending a number of years on the agency side of the business, I actually ended up coming back to New York for a few years. My kids, by then, you know, we went from having nothing and living in LA it was like my husband and I and a backpack and, you know, and nothing, to coming back after having 2 kids and, you know, the station wagon and the dog and the career. And we came back, moved to Long Island. So I lived in Hewlett for a few years. And my kids got to know their family. In fact, as I'm sitting here, I just got a text from my daughter, who just flew from New York to San Francisco and just landed. So thankfully she's safe, and we'll make her way to Palm Springs in a couple of days. But anyway, I digress. So that just shows you the bi-coastal nature of my life still. And so I after working at this agency on the Disney business for a long time, I came back to New York for a few years and left to go to this little internet startup. And it was a startup called IAG at the time. And I went from having the big cushy job to a startup company where there were 5 of us. We had $1 million in the bank, a PowerPoint presentation, and an idea. And the idea was to conduct research online, which had never really been done before. So this was back in '99. And we built a research survey technology online that was called Reward TV, and created a database of reactions to all the ads that ran on television. And that gave me my little taste of being an entrepreneur. And I love watching Shark Tank now because I'm obsessed with all those stories. And really learning what it meant to go from a very big company with all that support to a little startup. And it was very risky. But my husband said, look, you can do this and either have a great experience and we'll get really rich and it'll be some big payout, or you'll get new experiences and you'll meet new people and you'll have tried something different and then you'll use that experience to move on. And the reality landed somewhere in between. It wasn't the, giant like get rich quick scheme. But it opened up my horizons and I learned a lot about business that way. And the big thing that it did for me was it made some new introductions that I never had before. And one of those introductions was to a big client of mine at 20th Century Fox. And by then I had moved back to LA. My client at Fox called me and offered me a job and said, your focus on data and how people react to advertising for movies is something we need here. And so then I moved over onto the studio side of the business, which, when you live in LA and you're interested in entertainment, it's a very sexy thing to do. So I had the opportunity to work at Fox for 4 years and launched some really exciting movies. I was part of the Fantastic Four movies and the X-Men movies, and then smaller movies like Walk the Line that Reese Witherspoon won an Oscar for. And I got to go to the Oscars and bring my daughter, and my daughter got to hold Reese Witherspoon's Oscar, and I talk about these things not to like name drop or, or do any of that, but to say like this kid who grew up in Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn, who had no idea that this world was real, like got to work, and who was a PACE alum, got to do these things. And so I never took them for granted at all, because I was, as opposed to some of the people in Hollywood who'd kind of always grown up with this and always seen it. So from there, after working at Fox for a while, what I really realized was, as sexy as that seemed, I loved data and research. And so I left and I went to Nielsen and spent 10 years at Nielsen building out their data analytics capability. That was a big part of what I did there, was build an analytics function at Nielsen. And after doing that for a while, I decided to get back into kind of almost back to my roots on the agency side of the business. And then from there, realized it was really important at this stage of my career and life to stay relevant and to make sure that I understood what was happening in the world of digital and mobile. So that's when I chose to go to Snapchat, which was a super cool experience. And I could have been everyone's mother at Snapchat. In fact, Evan Spiegel is the exact same age as my son. And but it was great because I got to learn so much from so many people there about tech, about mobile usage, about using the camera as a lens to the world, all of those things. And they got to learn from me and from my experience, and respected that, and that was great. And then a couple other moves down the road and landed at WarnerMedia, which for me was the culmination of everything I had done in traditional media and traditional television, coupled with this new way that we're all getting our video through streaming services. And that's really kind of where I've landed. And for me, it was the best, again, combination of all of my skill sets, because I was able to translate the traditional entertainment experience with the more current technology experience. And that's really what I spent half my day doing, talking to the technology side of the business, helping them understand the way that the entertainment folks and the people who are making TV and making movies think, and then explaining to those people the kinds of technology and data things they need to understand. So that was a really long-winded path through my LinkedIn profile, if you guys took a look at that, and a little bit about kind of how I landed in the places I've landed. And in every case, it was definitely a concerted decision for me to move on to whatever that next opportunity was that felt right. But they weren't always like this upward path. When I went to Snap, that was a very lateral move. I went from running the West Coast of an ad agency and having 200 people report to me to a very small team where I only had like 4 people initially reporting into me. But I knew I needed to, again, become or stay relevant. And I focused on entertainment research for Snap, which I loved. And it was a great part of my career path. And I think that's a really important thing, particularly for anybody who's starting out, to realize, especially now, that is the way so many people's careers take shape. right? It is not just this thing that goes this way. It's very much something that you need to take charge of and really make concerted decisions about. And oftentimes it looks like people might take sideways moves or take steps back, and that's not what it is if you're taking control of it. So yeah, that was a lot. I think I'll breathe for a minute now and let you guys ask me any questions that you might want to ask. Jennifer.
Hi, so I'm Jennifer. I'm in PACE's new Arts and Entertainment Management program, just created it. And I was wondering how COVID affected you in terms of WarnerMedia. So while on one hand, entertainment is kind of going down because we don't have the resources to make those more projects. On the other hand, you're probably very busy because so many people are on streaming platforms that things have spiked.
Yeah, it's really been, I mean, it's been fascinating. Look, obviously we are all in uncharted water, right? So there's no playbook for this. So what's happened at a company like Warner, so, you know, WarnerMedia Entertainment, the parts that I personally am responsible for span our portfolio. So it's the entertainment cable networks, TBS, TNT, and True. Then it's HBO and all things HBO, and then HBO Max. So obviously not having new like what we do, right? At the end of the day, we make TV, and then Warner Brothers makes movies. Like that is the product we make. So absolutely we have been crippled by not being able to make that content. And it's slowly starting to get back. And that really is the focus of the company right now. We were talking before, like there's no plan yet for when we go back to office. Because we have to be 100% laser focused on getting productions up and running. And so first we just had to go through, again, it was completely unknown, and the government wasn't providing a lot of resources. And so suddenly we had people who ran our development teams who had to become experts in PPE and testing and insurance and all of these things that they didn't need to know up until now. And we had to make decisions in very different ways. Like, you know, we'd have certain shows, let's say we'd already shot 10 of 12. So you want to get those shows back into production faster so you could shoot the last 2 and have a completed series that you can put on the air. There's a show called Flight Attendant, which HBO Max was supposed to launch with. Haley Cuoco stars in it, you know, from Big Bang, and what else was she? I forget what she was on before that. But so we were supposed to launch HBO Max with it, but they had completed like 8 or 10 of them and didn't want to launch without that. So now it's back in production and getting finished. So there's no question that there will be a gap. And frankly, every single media company is trying to fill in as best as possible. It's the same challenge we see with sports right now. Like, so NBA last night, or the night before, right? I don't know if they're in the playoffs or the finals. I'm not the biggest sports fan, but I know they're somewhere along there, and I know the Lakers are in it. But the ratings were half of what they were a year ago because they're also competing with football and with baseball. Like, they're not used to being in that competitive set. So the production side of things is very challenged. The movie studio, obviously, incredibly challenged. Warner Brothers movie Tenet was, you know, the first one to go back into theaters, and that's painful because it's only made $40 million in 3 weekends in the US, and that should have been $200 million. But that said, everybody's in the same boat. And then we do have the other positive side, which is the streaming service. Right. So, you know, we had to, you know, I remember one of the last meetings I was in the office in the first or second week of March, probably the first week of March, maybe even the last week of February. And it was before everything had shut down, and we were launching on May 27th. And we had to make the call, like, do we keep going with the launch or do we pause it? Because even though we have a lot of the content, our whole marketing plan had to be changed. Because all of a sudden we were going to do huge outdoor events and experiential things that we were going to get people to come to, and red carpet premieres and all those things. And all of a sudden you couldn't do that. But we made the decision to move forward. We made sure all of our engineers could work from home. They had what they needed so they could continue programming the platform itself, which wasn't done. And since then, you know, we had a successful launch of HBO Max. We're fortunate that we have a treasure trove of content. I mean, what sits, you know, all the content that sits from Warner Brothers, and all of the HBO stuff that we have. I mean, we've got phenomenal content. We had obviously already made deals to buy Friends, The Big Bang Theory. So our users are very, very engaged with the platform, and obviously lots and lots of streaming services are launching, and it's the way everyone's going to get all their media. So it's been difficult on the content side. It's been pretty good on the streaming service side, you know, better than somebody like, let's say, a Disney, who doesn't have a lot of the things. And the other part of it is, you know, we're owned by AT&T. So we're owned by the phone company that's been part of keeping the infrastructure of this country up and running, which is sort of a proud thing to be able to say, and a pretty big deal, because you could joke about working for the phone company, but they've done some pretty amazing things in the last 6 months. So, you know, it's been good and bad. You know, we have moved forward, and I think the most incredible part, and probably just like is happening right here, is the way the business side of things didn't skip a beat. We just woke up one day, we were working from home, we flipped on our WebExes, and we had all the same meetings, and we just have now found new ways to communicate, new ways to do team building, new ways to work together. And, you know, I think just like a lot of things, the way in which we work will be forever changed. I don't think our office will ever open up again to a 5-day a week, everybody has their own workspace and has to show up every day. I think we're going to reimagine what a workplace looks like in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Anybody else have any questions?
If you have a question, you may certainly say it, or you may put it in the chat, and Ileana can respond.
I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned at the beginning the 3 areas of media: the buy and the sell and the research. For someone who has maybe more experience on the buy or sell side, trying to enter into the research area, a lot of the times when you look at the entry-level opportunities now, you need a lot of skills. You need Python skills and experience maybe with large data platforms. How do you successfully translate your prior experience into another area of media, into a research role without those skills?
Yeah. So there's 2 ways to think about a research role, right? Because there definitely is still a lot of much more traditional research, whether that is, and it kind of depends on the side of research you want to be on. Because no matter what, you have to understand data, but there is more qualitative kinds of research, first of all, that you can do, whether that's, you know, focus group kind of work or more traditional survey-based research, where you don't necessarily have to have as much of that big data skill set. Now, I would say everybody everywhere should be developing some level of big data skill sets, right? And whether that's learning Python and SQL and BI tools to look at data visualization things. But it doesn't mean you have to go like the full-blown heavy data side of things. Like for me, that's something that, especially given obviously where I am in my life stage, it's not something I grew up with at all. So I've had to make sure that I could understand it conceptually. But I definitely would encourage anybody to learn some SQL, learn some coding, so you at least get it conceptually. You don't have to necessarily be a coder, right? But you need to then be able to understand how to communicate with those people. Or you don't have to be a data scientist, but you need to understand what they're doing and how to communicate with them. But you can you can get more involved in the more qualitative sides of research and understand. You still have to understand methodologies and survey design and sampling techniques, and all of those things. And one of the, we were chatting before we got on, one of, I think, the most important skill sets moving forward is going to be understanding the combination of those 2 things, because there are a lot of people studying deep data science, right, and programming skills and coding skills. And then there are people who are doing more traditional research. But what's going to become the most important thing in my estimation is combining these things together. And I'll give you a couple of examples. At HBO Max, I don't oversee the data teams or the data science teams, but we are so joined at the hip with them, because we do every week, we're doing customer satisfaction research, right? So we are surveying people who are data scientists and our data team send us sample of people who either have signed up for a free trial, have become a subscriber, or who have lapsed and canceled, right? And then we survey them because we want to understand their experience, right? What made them sign up? What made them cancel? What did they like? What didn't they like? We want to understand their demographics so we can see if there are patterns in the types of people who are leaving. But then what we do is we take their responses and we link it to their behavior when they were actually using the platform. So the data science team works with us to take that data, plug it in, and then we can look at, okay, they said they left because there wasn't enough content for them. And then we can look at how much content they actually watched when they are on the platform. Did they do what they said they did, right? Those sorts of things. Because sometimes people will say that, and then you realize they never really used it. And that can help us understand what do we need to do so that somebody like that doesn't cancel. So the other thing we'll do is we do tracking research on a regular basis where we're looking at whether people are interested in subscribing, right? And then we want to follow them and see if they actually did subscribe and what did they do. So again, long way of saying, I think that it's important to connect both parts of the world. I do think, I haven't seen a lot of people go from being in buying or selling into the research side of things. It doesn't tend to be a path that I've actually seen very much of. And a lot more of what's happening on the buying and selling side of media is it's becoming programmatic. So whereas it used to be that it was a handshake, it was very relationship driven. Now what's happening is, like, even in our world, we have what we would call our brand media planners and buyers, right? And they're doing the big picture, like things that aren't as trackable, and they're creating the big events, and they're buying traditional television and that kind of thing. And then you have the growth media planners and buyers, and they're the ones who sit behind a keyboard and they are bidding on inventory. And it is not about a relationship with somebody who's selling them that inventory. It really is about understanding the tools that exist as a media buyer to buy programmatically and in a very quantitative way. And that really is much more of where the world of media planning and buying is going, very much, and buying and selling, very much into this much more programmatic world. And that's where TV is going to head also. So I do think a lot of the people who are traditional TV sellers or buyers right now are very quickly trying to transform themselves to this programmatic world, because that's where TV will be. Does that help answer your question? I saw you smiled.
I was a programmatic specialist in my last role. So that was interesting to hear. Actually, a follow-up question real quick, if I may. Do you think programmatic it sounds like you don't think it's a trend. A lot of people think it may be a trend just because all the media buying that's going on, people are trying to replicate the traditional model by ingesting things like audience targeting or contextual targeting, behavioral targeting, and trying to mimic the more fully baked out strategies that were used in the past. Do you think everything is just going to be automated in the future?
Yes. I think and I wouldn't have said the same thing 3 years ago, but seeing where it's going and seeing how quickly the TV industry is trying to move there, I think not all of it, but I would say 80% of it, and maybe 20% will still be traditional media buying, because the big inventory will always get held out. No one's buying the Super Bowl programmatically. Nobody's buying the Oscars. They're not buying the NBA finals, because that inventory is too valuable to land in an automated exchange. And apologies for anybody if this is foreign language to some of you guys. But that will always get held out, because it won't just be about buying the advertising. It will be about the whole experience. So that if you're buying something in the NBA finals, you're also buying sponsorship and signage in the stadium and, relationships with the talent. And it creates much more of an event than just buying ads. So there will absolutely always be a portion of it. But I think more and more is going to shift programmatic. And I think the things you're talking about, that programmatic though is trying to get more nuanced, like including more than just how many impressions am I getting, but actually targeting audiences that are most likely to be the audiences that an advertiser knows will get its best business outcome. So I think that's what's happening with programmatic. It's trying to get more data into it that, you know, will get you a better outcome. But television is trying to get that way as quickly as it can.
Thank you.
Sure.
I believe Morgan had a question.
Yes, thank you. So I was just wondering what you think the differences are going to be because of the pandemic within your industry. How do you think, sorry if you hear construction in my house, what do you think either new things that'll become of it or things that'll be changed forever?
Yeah, look, I think that it's a tough, I mean, look, there's going to be the things that I think are going to change forever behaviorally are things like movie going, because I think that a lot of people are now getting used to watching on that bigger screen at home and are going to reject walking into a movie theater for anything other than a giant blockbuster that you have to see on that screen because of the experience and wanting the social experience of being in the room with other people. But I think that more and more mid-tier and smaller movies are going to launch just as effectively online with viewing parties that people do at home, you know, and watching online along with people. Disney Plus just announced that. Netflix does it. We're going to do it. So I do think that movie going will be forever changed, but I think the movie theaters are kicking and screaming for good reason, because their business model relies on you going in there. I think that the workplace, again, will be forever changed. But I think in a lot of ways in a very positive way, where the workplace will end up being more of a place where you go when you need to gather for a communal reason, right? Once it's safe for people to be together, it'll be more of a place you go to have a group meeting, not to sit at a desk and work individually, because everybody's gotten comfortable with that. I do think what it will do for a lot of companies and a lot of people as they come out of school and are looking for work, it makes geography way less important. And so much more progressive companies are going to they're going to know that they can get the best talent anywhere. And so you won't have to be dependent on living in a big city and paying those kinds of rents if you don't want to, because a lot of companies are going to allow for that. So it should create opportunity. But, you know, in full transparency, it'll be a little while for some of that opportunity because companies are struggling. Every kind of company is struggling right now, and there are layoffs happening everywhere. So, you know, it's definitely a tough time. But it also means like the more sort of just resourceful you can be about figuring out how you make connections. And it should be easier for people to agree to make a connection with you, right? And to have a virtual cup of coffee, because people don't have to physically go somewhere. So I've connected with more people this way than I have for years because it's easy to do. And so I think figuring out the ways to make those connections happen, it's kind of hard to say no to somebody. Like, I know I can't find a half an hour somewhere to hop on a call. So I'm sort of a little bit all over the place, but I think workplaces, you know, are going to change. It will be harder because you don't have that same like bump into you in the hallway and try and have a conversation. So you do have to figure out your way in and use every resource you have through whatever connections you have, and alumni associations and all of those things are definitely great ways to do that. And I just think in businesses that we never could have imagined, you know, are going to come out of nowhere. Like in-home fitness is another one. So people now, again, have figured out that they don't have to go to the gym. They have figured out their fitness routine in their homes. Look at Peloton's stock. Killing me that I did not buy that way back when, because I've been a Peloton devotee since 2016, like obsessively. But that is another industry that is absolutely going to change. And gyms are, and one of the reasons I can talk about that as well is we actually had opened an indoor cycling studio here in Palm Springs, and we closed it because of COVID, because it just was never going to be what we had hoped it was going to be. So I think that's another business. So that is going to change a lot. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you for answering.
Yes, hi. So I see that you were a consultant with Quibi. Did you, I guess, agree with the mobile only platform at first? And do you think that, I guess, mobile long form content will continue to be pushed out in the future?
Yeah. So I was not a fan of that at all. So I went to Quibi because I was leaving Snap and we were opening our spin studio and I was kind of trying to figure out what did I want to do next. So I had the opportunity to join them as a consultant. And for me personally, what I was helping them do first, and then I'll answer your question, but I'll give you a little background. What I was helping them do was get ready for ad sales measurement. So they had gone out and they sold $150 million worth of advertising to 10 major advertisers who all committed $15 million. But it was a theory. And so they realized, oh, now we're going to have to actually prove that this advertising ran and that it worked. And so we need ad research and measurement for these big advertisers. So I came in to consult to help them put in place everything they needed to put in place for the advertisers that they sold to prove that it was actually working. And for me, it was an exciting opportunity to take what I had just done at Snapchat and frankly, to work alongside Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman. And it was still a small startup world. And literally I would sit at my desk and there's Jeffrey and there's Meg and I'd get to be in meetings with them. And that was a very cool opportunity to be a part of. But I never really believed that a short form paid mobile service was really going to take off. Number one, I say this all the time. There was not a problem that they were solving. It was not as if there were consumers who were saying, gee, I don't really know what to do when I have 10 minutes to kill. I just wish there was something I could use my mobile phone for. I mean, it just, you would go to YouTube, you would check your Instagram, you would, do whatever else you could do you could watch 10 minutes of whatever you happen to be watching on Netflix and pause it and come back again. So I didn't think they were really solving a problem. And their business model honestly didn't make a lot of sense. And I don't know how much you've read into what their business model is, but they don't own any of their content. So the deals that they made, so Jeffrey Katzenberg can sell ice to the Eskimos, to use one of those famous, sayings. And he went out into Hollywood and he was able to get every major, I wouldn't call them major, all these talented people to create content for Quibi because he paid them for them to create it, plus 20% on top of that cost. And all he did was license it from them for 7 years, and then they would own it. So if you're a creator, there's no risk to you because it doesn't cost you anything. So the business model to me never made sense from both a mobile only standpoint, and it's not really mobile only anymore because now they have TV deals. And it never made sense to me from a content standpoint because I didn't think they were creating such great quality content. And then Jeffrey, frankly, still ran it a lot like a very old school Hollywood company. So I'd be curious for any of you who might have watched any of the content to know what you might think about it, because they didn't seem to be doing very progressive things with the content. I'm sorry, like a Reno 911 remake is just not necessarily like, the newest, greatest thing. Or they would have news content and they'd have somebody actually sitting behind a desk with a tie. Like, I don't think that's how most of you guys want to get your news. So it was a great experience, smart people, getting to be part of that startup mode and getting to go to meetings with people like Meg and Jeffrey. But I never really felt like the business model made sense. And I think that's, it's proving itself out. And, rumors now are that they're for sale, but I don't really know what there is to sell.
Thank you.
Do you watch Quibi? Do you watch anything on it?
No, I actually haven't checked it out, but I remember hearing about how it was mobile only when they first put it out, and a lot of the, I guess, 90-day free trial users didn't end up extending, which was like a whole big thing for them and for the industry. So I was just kind of following it, but I never subscribed. I never watched any of the content really.
And therein lies part of their problem, because if you could get it for free for 90 days and you are their target and there was nothing compelling enough right? For you to take advantage of this free service for 90 days says a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Sure.
It's obvious that data is very important for buying space and doing some marketing, but I'm more curious the role of data in development. I come from a development background, and we didn't really use any data beyond our own research. It felt very archaic.
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. I'm curious when you say archaic, what you mean. Was it more like traditional focus groups, that kind of thing? Or
It was focus groups and a lot of Googling and just index cards, seeing what sticks and pitching it up to nowhere.
Yeah. Look, there's always going to be this blend of art and science, right? And so the development teams, different development teams in different companies have different philosophies. And I can talk from like sitting right now where I sit. The HBO development team never used any research or data, never, and been quite successful, right, in creating unbelievable content. And it was always about, you know, what they felt was going to work. And it was Richard Plepler did that, now Casey Bloys who runs it. But they also had a different set of KPIs, right, or key performance indicators, because for them, they weren't selling ads, so they didn't have to care about the size of the rating. And so they cared about winning awards, because the more that they won awards and created big event programming, the more they would get better talent to agree to work with them. And then the more they'd be able to get subscribers, and it became this self-fulfilling prophecy. On the other hand, the folks who sit at TBS and TNT and those places are heavily dependent on research as they develop their shows. But generally, research and data doesn't do a good job of driving like what it might tell you what kinds of shows do you need in a very, very broad sense, right? So at HBO Max, we will look at it and we will tell our development team, hey, it looks like we've got some gaps in horror, sci-fi for young women. So that will at least point them in a direction, because the data says there's not enough, right? Once people finish watching, or that's a bad example, but once people finish watching Friends and The OC and Pretty Little Liars, there's nothing else to hand them off to. So you need something for people who like those shows. But at that point, the development teams won't use a lot of research to, they'll hear pitches, right? And they'll try to hear pitches about shows that fit that bill. Then once they've decided on a show, then we'll tend to do research to help them, with some of the development of the show, of the characters, of that sort of thing. So we'll show, the pilot episode or a few episodes to people and get their feedback and understand, like, hey, they think this character is a little too hard-edged, or they don't like it when she drinks this much, or, that character in the background, they really like that character. And so then they will give notes to the production team, to the creatives to dial up a character, dial down something. But it's never a mandate. It's always guidance to help them improve the show based on what they're hearing. But it's never like a checkbox thing, which is like, this is the format and it will get you a winner. So the other thing we'll do during that form of research, though, is understand, how do you want to position the show? Because any show could be positioned a number of ways. Is it a romantic comedy? Is it a zany drama? Whatever it is. So we'll use that same research in those early stages to decide how to best position it when we market the show, and who is most interested in it, so we understand who to target in the earliest stages. So it definitely, and I will also say that in the earliest days of like Amazon and Netflix, they would claim that they didn't use research at all in their development process. And they would claim, Amazon especially was famous for this, they would claim that they would crowdsource all of their research. So they'd post some trailers and some information about upcoming shows, and they would let their users vote on the shows. But I can tell you that behind the scenes, they were doing all of the same research that everybody else was doing. They just would never admit it publicly. Because at the time I was running the division of Nielsen that did program testing. It was called NETV, Nielsen Entertainment Television. And we were doing testing for Amazon and for Netflix for some of their earliest originals. They just would never talk about it publicly.
Thank you.
Sure.
I believe George raised his hand.
Hi, thank you for being with us today. So to my understanding, you've worked a lot for most of your career as a bridge between the technical world and the more business world. So I was curious to ask you, what was your biggest challenge that you had to face? And if you look back now, what would be the best advice you have given to yourself to deal with that?
Yeah, I love those questions. They're always such hard questions to answer, especially after as long as I've been doing this. Probably it was the idea of when I went to Snap, of realizing that, it was okay, and not just okay, but like a really good thing to take a step back and recognize how much I didn't know, and be fully willing to admit in any room what I didn't know from the tech side, because at that point I really hadn't done a lot of tech work. And so, being willing to say, hey, I don't really understand what you're talking about, and I need you to explain it to me. And I would have some of the guys on our product team or our engineering team, literally, I would make them go to a big whiteboard and start to draw this stuff out for me so that I could really understand what they were doing, and what they were saying, and then apply it to what I did. So it really was just about being, it's a very vague sort of answer, but it was about just being very willing to admit, not just admit what I didn't know, but then like learn it. Not so that I would be an expert in it, but so that I would have like the compassion and the empathy and to understand the other side of it, to make to be better at what I did. And particularly the other really important thing when you're involved in data is to understand how that data is getting constructed and put together, because it's very easy, if you're just the end user of it, to assume that it must be right, because the math was right and the calculations were right, but without really understanding what went into that data set. So asking questions when something just doesn't smell right is really important, and kind of trusting your instinct to do that. Yeah, so that's sort of very vague. They're not really like explicit examples.
No, it's very good. Thank you.
Okay, I have one more question. How does Warner view privacy? How has GDPR influenced you and California's privacy rules?
So, I mean, look, obviously Warner is huge, and by being part of AT&T, we're huge. So we're under a giant microscope. So, I mean, all I would say is like, we just do everything that absolutely needs to be done. And so we have been we were preparing for GDPR and CCPA, and we've got like armies of people preparing to do that. I will say some of the other things that we do, like we have to be very careful because AT&T is a regulated business, right? And so since AT&T is regulated and owns DirecTV and owns Warner, we are super sensitive to how we share data up and back across our organization. So there are way more lawyers involved than we would ever like, but we are always very, very careful to engage our privacy attorneys anytime we have data changing hands across the company. We also have spent a good amount of time conducting research with consumers about privacy to make sure that we are asking for their information in a way that they're comfortable with. So we see it as not something that's just behind the scenes, but we see it as something that's a very consumer-facing thing that's important. So, it's, and it's going to get harder and harder, not just because of the government regulations, but, if you follow, what you'll see is that, Apple is going to make it harder to track using their identifiers. And Apple sits at the epicenter of, your device ID sitting here on your iPhone is not going to become as easily accessible. So, and Facebook obviously has had lots and lots of privacy and data issues. So I think we're at this place now where consumers are going to be asked more and more to opt into things versus, accidentally opting out. And unfortunately, the big players, Facebook, Google, Apple, their walled gardens are going to become more and more walled. And businesses are going to have to rely more and more on their own data that they own and not be able to do as much to connect their data to other data. Now, there's lots of technology that's getting created for that. But the last few years have been probably a little Wild West, where there were a lot of companies that made a lot of money just kind of connecting all the data crumbs together. And that's getting harder and harder to do. But big companies, whether it's a WarnerMedia, or a Facebook or a Nielsen, have got to be following those privacy laws, to the nth degree. And it's just cost them a lot in extra lawyers and extra data people.
Well, we're just about out of time. So I want to thank Ms. Idell for taking time out of her very, very busy schedule to join us from sunny Southern California. I don't guess we're going to get a chance to see the mountains outside your house. I don't guess, are we?
No, they're too far over there.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you taking time. I know the students on this Dean's Roundtable got a lot out of this, and I really appreciate you taking time. So with that, I will bring this to a close. We have a very nice gift to give you, but unfortunately I can't hand that to you through the Zoom. So please look for something to arrive shortly. And I'll look forward to continuing the conversation with you and to get you more involved again with PACE. And thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thanks to all of you guys for the time and for listening. I hope it was helpful. And and I really appreciate you guys reaching out to me and tracking me down, since it had been many years since I had gotten involved again with PACE. So I'm happy to be involved again.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all the students for being here. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
So long.
So
Thank you.